In the sleepy hollow of Cedar Hollow, Ohio, where wheat fields ripple gold under a wide sky and church bells toll like a heartbeat every Sunday, Caleb Monroe was a whisper on the wind. 17. With dark hair tumbling over sharp green eyes, he carried a beat-up guitar like a second soul, its strings humming secrets he'd never dared voice. The town was a quilt of tradition. Pickup trucks rumbled down Main Street. Men swapped stories over coffee at the diner, and boys were raised to chase girls under the bleachers at Friday night games. Anything else was a crack in the code, a sin to be scrubbed clean with prayer and scorn. Caleb knew this. He'd known it since 9th grade, when he'd caught himself humming a tune for a boy with a crooked smile, a melody he'd buried deep beneath the floorboards of his heart. It was a damp April evening, the air thick with the scent of fresh-cut grass, when the world he'd built came crashing down. Cedar Hollow High buzzed with whispers of the Spring Music Festival, a chance for kids to strum their dreams under the gym's flickering lights. Caleb had slipped into the auditorium after hours, the shadows his only audience, to audition in secret. His fingers danced over the strings, his voice low and trembling as he sang a song he'd written in the dead of night. Two boys by the river, shadows soft and free, love don't bow to judgment, it just needs to be. The words spilled out, raw and real, a confession he'd locked away for years. He didn't see the phone glinting in the dark, didn't hear the snicker behind the seats. But someone did, a junior named Brad, captain of the basketball team, with a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. By morning, that video was a wildfire roaring through the school's socials. Captioned, "Monroe thinks he's a queer rock star." The halls of Cedar Hollow High turned into a gauntlet overnight. Caleb shuffled in, his sneakers scuffing the linoleum, the guitar slung over his shoulder like a shield. But the air was thick with eyes. Jocks snickered over lockers. Girls whispered behind cupped hands. Even the janitor's mop paused as he shot a sideways glance. By first bell, the video had hit every phone. Caleb's voice echoing through earbuds. Two boys by the river. Laughter sliced the air, a blade he couldn't dodge. Brad strutted up in the cafeteria, slamming his tray down, his voice booming over the clatter. "Yo, Monroe, didn't know you were into fairy tales." The room erupted, head swiveling, pinning Caleb like a bug on a board. He froze, his tray trembling in his hands, the mashed potatoes blurring as his throat tightened. Then he saw it, scrawled in black marker across his locker. Freak. Jagged and bold, a brand that burned deeper than the Snickers bouncing off the cinder block walls. He'd gone from invisible to infamous in hours. Yesterday, he was just the quiet kid with the guitar, slipping through the cracks of a town that didn't look twice. Now, he was a target painted red in a school that thrived on sameness. Lunch was a battlefield. He sat alone, the table empty around him, his sandwich untouched as whispers circled like vultures. Queer, pervert. He's done for. The words sank into his skin, heavier than the guitar on his back. Friends he'd once had, Mia from band, Josh from history, vanished. Their seats cold beside him, their eyes averted in the halls. Caleb clutched his hoodie, pulling it tight. But it couldn't shield him from the weight of a town that hated him for breathing a truth he'd never meant to share. Home was no refuge. Word slithered through Cedar Hollow's grapevine, curling into the Monroe house like smoke. His dad? Ray, a broad-shouldered ex-Marine with a buzz cut and a temper, caught it from a buddy at the mill. That night, the kitchen turned into a courtroom, the fluorescent light buzzing harsh overhead. Ray paced, his boots thudding on the linoleum, his face red as the factory whistle. "What the hell's this?" "Caleb, singing that crap? You shaming us in front of the whole damn town?" Caleb shrank, his fingers twisting the hem of his shirt, the song's echo burning in his chest. His mom, Ellen, hovered by the sink, her hands wringing a dish rag, her voice a murmur. Maybe it's just a phase. Ray, but her eyes darted away, her silence louder than words. Caleb stared at the floor. The linoleum cracked like his world, and wondered how a song, a piece of him, could unravel everything he'd held together so long. Cedar Hollow had branded him, and there was no hiding now. The town's judgment was a noose tightening with every step, every stair. Alone in his garage that night, the walls lined with old tools and dust. Caleb traced a finger over his guitar's chipped wood. The strings stared back, silent witnesses to a secret that wasn't secret anymore. His breath came fast, ragged, as the weight of who he was crashed against a place that wanted him gone. This wasn't just a bad day. It was the start of a war he'd never signed up for, a fight he wasn't sure he could win. If that gut-punching moment hooked you, hit that like, share this with someone who's felt the sting of standing out, and subscribe to Heartstories. We're diving deep into Caleb's battle next. Caleb Monroe's world unraveled faster than a string snapped from his guitar. By Monday, Cedar Hollow High was a crucible, the linoleum halls a maze of judgment where every step echoed with the venom of a town scorned. The video of his song, Two Boys by the River, Shadows Soft and Free, had metastasized, buzzing through Snapchat and Instagram, a digital noose tightening around his neck. The whispers of yesterday turned to shouts, the snickers to fists. Brad, the basketball captain with a buzz cut and a mean streak, ruled the chaos like a king. At lunch, he swaggered up, his sneakers squeaking on the tile, and slammed Caleb's guitar case onto a table. Let's hear it. Fairy boy, he sneered, yanking it open. Before Caleb could lunge, Brad grabbed the old Gibson, raised it high, and smashed it against the floor. The wood splintered, strings twanging a dying cry, and the cafeteria roared with laughter as Caleb dropped to his knees, hands trembling over the wreckage of his lifeline. The torment didn't stop there. By afternoon, the jocks cornered him in the music room after band practice. The door slammed shut, a lock clicked, and the air grew stale as Brad's crew circled. You like singing about queers? Brad grunted, shoving Caleb against a rack of sheet music. Papers fluttered like confetti as hands pinned his arms, dragging him to a storage closet. Stay in there, freak, Brad barked, slamming the door. The dark swallowed Caleb whole, his fists pounding the wood, his voice a raw scream lost in the black. Minutes stretched to an eternity, his breath shallow, the guitar's broken neck flashing in his mind until a custodian finally pried it open, muttering, "Keep it down, kid," and walking away. Outside, graffiti bloomed on the school's brick wall. No queers in Cedar, red paint dripping like blood, a message that stung worse than the bruises blooming on his ribs from a shove in the stairwell. Home offered no sanctuary. That night, Ray stormed in, his steel-toed boots thumping the linoleum, the video playing on his phone like a siren. "This what you've been doing in my house?" he roared, slamming it down. His face was a furnace, eyes blazing as he towered over Caleb, who shrank into the couch. "You're shaming us," church folks staring. Guys at the mill laughing. My own kid's a pervert. Caleb's throat burned, words choking behind the lump. But Ray's bellow cut him off. "You're not pulling this crap under my roof. You hear?" Ellen hovered by the stove, her hands twisting a dish rag, her voice a thread. "Ray, maybe he's just confused." But her eyes flicked to the floor, her prayer a whisper Caleb couldn't lean on. He fled to the garage, the door banging shut, and sank against the wall, the cold concrete a mirror to the cage closing in. School was a war zone now, and the adults were deserters. "I miss Foster," the music teacher who'd once called Caleb's chords a gift, turned her back in the hall, her heels clicking away as Brad's crew pelted him with crumpled cans. The next day, a brick sailed through the garage window at dawn, glass shattering across his workbench, a note tied tight, "Die queer." Caleb stood amid the shards, his pulse a jackhammer, the threat sinking into his bones. He dragged himself to the principal's office, hands shaking as he laid the note on Mr. Dawson's desk. The man's gray eyes barely lifted from his coffee. "We've got a situation here." "Monroe," Dawson said, voice clipped. "You're suspended 1 week. Can't have this chaos." Caleb's jaw dropped, his voice cracking. "Me?" "They're the ones," Dawson cut him off, leaning forward. "You brought this on. Son, should have kept that song to yourself. Go home. Let it blow over." The injustice hit like a fist. Brad walked free, his smirk untouchable, while Caleb was branded the troublemaker. The town split like a fault line, voices clashing in a storm Caleb couldn't outrun. In the gym, Mr. Haley, the gruff P, coach with a buzz cut to match Ray's, barked to a group of teachers. "Kids asking for it, flaunting that sick stuff in our school. Ought to be gone for good." His words carried a sermon of scorn that echoed Cedar Hollow's old ways. But in history class, Mia, a wiry sophomore with paint-stained jeans, shot back at a snickering jock. "He just sang a song. What's wrong with you people? You're the freaks for caring so much." Her voice trembled but held, a crack of defiance in the haze. Word of her stand spread, a flicker of light Caleb couldn't reach. Trapped as he was in suspension's limbo, Cedar Hollow's hypocrisy was a blade twisting deeper. Mrs. Foster, who'd preached music heals, stayed silent to save her job, her eyes dodging his in the faculty lot. Dawson's "we're handling it" was a lie. The graffiti stayed. The jocks roamed, and Caleb's phone buzzed with hate. Kill yourself. Fag. Leave or we'll make you. Even Ellen's faint defense cracked under Ray's glare. At supper, she murmured, I don't understand. Caleb, but I don't want to lose you. Her hands trembling as she slid him a plate. Ray snorted, fork stabbing his meat. Lose him? He's already lost us. Caleb stared at the linoleum, the note's ink smudging in his pocket, his spirit buckling under a town that wouldn't let him breathe. The war had begun, and Caleb was its lone soldier, branded by a song, betrayed by the systems meant to protect him, and caught in a crossfire of clashing souls. Fairview's echoes roared loud, a chorus of hate he couldn't silence, and he wondered if he'd ever strum free of its grip. Caleb Monroe hit bottom under a bruised April sky, the weight of Cedar Hollow's hate pressing him into the earth like a stone sinking in the river he'd sung about. Suspension had turned his days into a prison of shadows. The garage his cell, its walls lined with rusted tools, its air thick with dust and the tang of broken glass. The brick that shattered his window lingered in his mind, its jagged edges a mirror to the note tied tight. Die queer. He sat cross-legged amid the wreckage, the shards glinting like teeth under the bare bulb swinging overhead. His guitar lay in pieces beside him, its neck snapped, strings curling like dead vines, a corpse of the one thing that had kept him breathing. His fingers traced the splintered wood, trembling as the hate text buzzed on his phone. A relentless drone. Kill yourself. Freak. Peter don't need you. The words clawed into his chest. Deeper than the bruises from Brad's shove, heavier than Ray's roared disgrace. For the first time, Caleb wondered if they were right. If disappearing might be easier than fighting a town that branded him wrong for existing. The garage door creaked that night, a sound sharp against the hum of crickets beyond the shattered pane. Caleb didn't look up, expecting Ray's boots or Ellen's timid shuffle, but the shadow that fell was softer, very unfamiliar. Mr. Jenkins, the old music teacher who'd retired years back, stepped in, his gray hair streaked with silver, his boots firm on the concrete. He'd taught Caleb chords in middle school, back when the boy's fingers stumbled but his eyes burned with hunger for sound. Now, those eyes met Caleb's hollow stare, steady as a lighthouse in a storm. Saw that video, Jenkins said, voice gravelly but warm, cutting through the silence. Your song, damn good. Son, don't care what they say. Caleb's breath hitched, his throat too tight to speak. But Jenkins knelt, unbothered by the glass, and pulled a battered case from behind him. It clicked open, revealing a sunburst acoustic, its wood worn but alive. This was mine, he said, sliding it over. She's yours now. They want you quiet. Don't let them win. Caleb's hands hovered over the strings. The gift a lifeline he didn't know he'd needed. Jenkins leaned in, his gaze piercing. There's a community showcase in Mill Creek tomorrow night. Off the radar. No names. Just kids like you. Singing what hurts. You should go. Not for them, for you. He stood, brushing dust from his jeans, and left without another word. The door groaning shut behind him. Alone again. Caleb traced the guitar's curves, its cool surface a shock against his skin. The hate still roared. Ray's "You're shaming us" echoing. The school's red paint glaring in his mind, but Jenkins's voice cut through. A thread in the dark. Don't let him win. He plucked a string. The note faint but clear, a pulse stirring in the ashes of his spirit. For hours, he sat there, the bulb flickering, his breath steadying as the idea took root. He wouldn't run. Not yet. By dawn, the garage was a crucible of defiance. Caleb's pencil scratched across a crumpled notebook. The words spilling fast, angry, jagged, alive. No more soft rivers or shadows free. This was a war cry. You branded me wrong. You built your hate tall, but I'll sing till your echoes fall. He called it branded. Each line a fist against the dark, each chord a stake in the ground. His fingers bled on the strings, unpracticed but fierce, the new guitar humming under his grip. The song wasn't just him, it was the closet's black choke, the brick's cold threat, the town's hot scorn. It was a mirror he'd avoided too long, reflecting a boy who'd hidden since 9th grade, when he'd hummed for a classmate's smile and torn the tune to shreds in panic. Now, that boy stared back, raw and real, and Caleb felt the weight shift, not gone, but bearable. Thursday night loomed. The Mill Creek Showcase, a gamble an hour's drive away. Caleb slipped out, hoodie up against the drizzle, the guitar slung over his shoulder like armor. Ray's truck rumbled in the distance, Ellen's silhouette faint at the kitchen window. But he didn't look back. The venue was a squat barn behind a library, its walls taped with butcher paper, its air thick with paint and nerves. 5 kids milled inside, outsiders like him, their eyes curious but kind. A girl with a shaved head nodded from a crate, strumming a banjo. A boy in a faded jacket tuned a fiddle. No one asked his name, and that was enough. When his turn came, Caleb stepped into the dim light, the barn's rafters swallowing the crowd's hum. He adjusted the strap, his heart a drumbeat, and let it rip. "You branded me wrong." His voice cracked at first, then rose, rough and fierce, the chords slashing the air. The room stilled, heads tilting, hands pausing mid-clap. "I'll sing till your echoes fall." The last note hung, heavy, and the barn erupted. Whistles, stomps, a roar that shook the dust from the beams. He left that night, the rain cool on his face, the guitar warm against his back. No one knew him there, but they'd heard him, really heard him, and that was a crack in the cage. Cedar Hollow loomed beyond the highway, its church bells tolling, its red paint waiting. But Caleb had strummed something alive. The hate hadn't won, not tonight. Back in the garage, he sank against the wall, the new song echoing in his skull, a flicker of defiance in his chest. He wasn't whole. Not yet. But he'd stopped sinking. The war wasn't over. Brad's smirk, Dawson's cold decree. Ray's glare still burned, but Caleb had a weapon now, a sound they couldn't break, and that was enough to breathe again. Caleb Monroe's spark from Mill Creek flared into a wildfire that Cedar Hollow couldn't douse. By Friday, the barn video of branded, "You branded me wrong, you built your hate tall," had slipped past the county line, ricocheting through phones and forums until it crashed back into town like a brick through glass. Someone tagged it, or Cedar Hollow, and the secret was out. Brad caught wind first, his jaw tight as he stormed the locker room, shoving his screen in his crew's faces. "Monroe's at it again, thinks he's a martyr now." The jocks jeered, but the ripple had already split the town, a fault line cracking wide under the weight of Caleb's voice. Suspension lifted Monday, and Caleb walked back into Cedar Hollow High, the guitar slung bold over his shoulder, his hoodie swapped for a flannel shirt that hung loose but defiant. The halls buzzed, a hive of eyes and whispers, jocks glaring from lockers, girls murmuring behind books, the air thick with tension that snapped like a taut string. Overnight, the school had become a battlefield of ink and will. Mia, the wiry sophomore with paint-stained jeans, had struck first. Posters slapped across the quad, "Let Caleb sing" in bold red marker, her handwriting a shout against the silence. By second period, Brad's crew retaliated, tearing them down, replacing them with scrawled sheets. "No queers here." The linoleum gleamed under flickering lights, a stage set for war, and Caleb felt every step like a drumbeat toward something he couldn't dodge. The town's elders lit the fuse. Sunday's church service had turned into a tribunal. Parents packed the pews, their voices sharp over hymns. "We can't have this corruption in our school." A deacon with a gray beard thundered, "It's a sin, spreads like a plague!" Flyers fluttered onto Main Street poles by dawn. "Protect our kids," with Caleb's name a whispered curse in every diner booth. Ray didn't go, but Ellen did, her coat tight as she sat in the back, her silence a nod to their fears. Word reached Caleb through a cracked window, neighbors muttering as they passed. Monroe kids' trouble. But Mia's stand had ignited a countercurrent. 5 kids joined her by Tuesday, taping posters in the bathrooms, their whispers growing bold. "He's just singing, let him be." Lunch was the breaking point. Caleb slipped into the courtyard, the new guitar in hand, its strings glinting under a gray sky. He'd hatched a plan, not to hide, but to roar. Word spread fast, a murmur racing through the halls. And by noon, the quad filled, Brad and his jocks up front, smirking over cans of Coke, teachers hovering at the edges, 100 eyes waiting for a fall. Caleb climbed onto a picnic table, the wood creaking under his boots, his heart a jackhammer as he gripped the neck. "This is me," he said, voice shaky but rising, cutting through the wind. "Not a freak, Not a sin, just a kid who sings what he feels. He strummed hard. Branded, ripping out. You branded me wrong. The chords raw. His throat rough with every note. I'll sing till your echoes fall. The crowd rippled. A sea of clashing tides. Brad lunged first. A soda can sailing from his hand, splashing Caleb's chest with sticky fizz. Shut it. Queer, he bellowed, his crew jeering, fists pumping. But Mia shot up, her frame small but fierce. Planting herself in front, let him talk. 3 kids flanked her, Josh from band, a quiet girl in glasses, a linebacker who'd never spoken, forming a wall. Their voices a jagged chorus. Let him sing. The song faltered, then roared back, Caleb's fingers bleeding on the strings, his eyes locked on the sky as the notes slashed the air. A few laughed. Brad chucking a rapper that missed, but others froze. Girls from choir nodding. A jock in the back clapping slow, uncertain. Misses. Foster stood by the door, her face pale. Her "this isn't right," a whisper drowned by the din. The clash spilled beyond the quad. By dusk, the video hit the local news. Cedar Hollow teen defies bullying with song. A grainy clip of Caleb on the table. Soda dripping, voice unbroken. The station ran it with dueling sound bites. A church mom hissing, "He's poisoning our kids," and Mia snapping, "They're the poison, leave him alone." The school board called an emergency meeting Wednesday. Dawson's office a war room as parents raged. "He's disrupting everything," a dad in a trucker hat barked, waving a "Protect Our Kids" flyer. A teacher countered, timid, "Maybe we failed him. Where's the discipline for the others?" Dawson's "we're handling it" rang hollow, his tie askew as he dodged the heat. Thursday's meeting was a reckoning. The gym swelled, parents, kids, reporters, chairs scraping, voices clashing. Caleb walked in, guitar in hand, flanked by Mia and her crew, their paint-stained hands a quiet rebellion. Dawson took the mic, his calm down lost in the roar as Brad's dad bellowed, "Suspend him again, he's the problem." Mia's mom shot back, "Your son's the bully, where's his punishment?" The room split, a tangle of shouts, "Sin! Fairness!" Until Caleb stepped up, uninvited, his boots thudding on the stage. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice steady now, green eyes sweeping the crowd. "I'm here to sing." He strummed Branded again. No mic, just him. "You built your hate tall," the gym falling silent, then erupting, half cheered, half booed, a deacon storming out, a girl in the back sobbing loud. The fallout was swift. Friday, the news ran a follow-up. Cedar Hollow divided, and Dawson buckled. Brad and 2 jocks got a week's suspension, their smirks wiped clean under the glare of cameras and a lawyer's letter from Mia's mom. Caleb stood in the garage that night, the guitar warm in his hands, the meeting's echo a storm he'd weathered. Cedar Hollow hadn't bent, not yet, but he'd cracked its armor, his song a blade they couldn't blunt. Caleb Monroe stood taller under a bruised May sky. The air in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, softening with the hum of spring and the faint rustle of wheat fields bending in the breeze. The war he'd never signed up for had left scars, the brick through his window, the snapped strings of his old guitar, the red paint dripping like blood on the school's brick wall. But it had also forged something unbreakable. Friday's fallout hit fast and hard. Principal Dawson, his tie crooked and his voice clipped, stood before a swarm of cameras in the gym, reading a statement that tasted like ash in his mouth. "We regret the oversight. 3 students have been suspended for their actions." Brad and his jocks slunk out, their week-long ban a crack in their untouchable armor, the news vans catching every scowl. Cedar Hollow High didn't cheer, but the silence shifted, a fragile truce born from a song and a boy who wouldn't break. The school board offered Caleb the stage at graduation, a polished gesture to sing Branded under the tassels and lights. He turned it down, his green eyes steady as he told Mia over a dented picnic table, "I don't need their spotlight." Instead, he poured his fire into something bigger. Monday after the meeting, he and Mia gathered in the music room, its walls still scarred from his lock-in, joined by Josh, the quiet girl in glasses, and the linebacker who'd clapped in the quad. They called it Cedar Voices, a club scratched into life with borrowed guitars and a vow, no one gets branded here. By week's end, 10 kids trickled in, then 20, outsiders with trembling hands and stories spilling onto strings and keys. Caleb led them, his voice steadier now, turning the room into a sanctuary where Cedar Hollow's rules couldn't reach. Posters bloomed in the halls, "Sing Your Truth," and the graffiti dulled, its red fading under layers of dust and defiance. Home stitched itself slow, threads rough but holding. Ellen slipped into the garage one night, her coat loose, her eyes wet as she watched Caleb strum. She didn't clap, didn't speak, but she stayed, her gaze soft as she murmured, "I'm proud you're brave." "Honey." Ray didn't bend far, his boots still thudded heavy, his jaw still tight, but he fixed the busted window with a grunt. "Keep singing, I guess." Supper passed with his fork-stabbing meatloaf, his silence less cold, his eyes flicking to the guitar propped by the door. One Sunday, he skipped church, sitting with Caleb on the porch steps, the air thick with unsaid words. "Don't get it," he muttered, "but you're my kid." It wasn't peace. Not fully, but it was a crack in the wall, a start Caleb clung to. Ellen hugged him after, her "I'm trying" a whisper that eased the ache, the cage loosening into a place he could breathe again. Cedar Hollow didn't flip overnight. Church flyers still circulated, their "Protect Our Kids" ink smudged but stubborn. Brad's glare still burned from the bleachers, his crew muttering as they passed. But the town shifted, inch by inch. A girl left a note in Caleb's locker. "I'm like you. Thanks." And a teacher, Mr. Halle, gruff but real, pulled him aside. That took guts. Monroe. The music room grew, its echoes spilling into the library, a mural of notes and hands painted on its door by Mia's crew. Dawson grumbled but let it slide, a tolerance talk creeping into staff meetings. Caleb sat under the school's lone oak at dusk, strumming boys who laughed free, his heart lighter, not whole, but healing. He'd lost friends, taken hits, but gained a truth he wouldn't trade, a life carved by his chords, not their scorn. He didn't win Cedar Hollow, didn't need to. He'd risen for himself. A gay kid in a hard town, proving strength wasn't silence but singing when the world pushed back. His song spoke where he couldn't, a quiet revolution shifting a few hearts, a legacy of grit and grace. This isn't about heroes, it's about living true, one messy note at a time. What would you risk to sing your soul loud? Share below. Caleb's fight might be yours too. If it moved you, hit like, share with someone who gets it, and subscribe to Heartstories for more.